This is News at Prime. Let's bring you this now. Trade and Industry Minister Pak Stau says his department is planning the nationwide rollout of export support offices. It comes ahead of tomorrow's implementation of 30% tariffs by the United States on numerous South African products. The automobile, steel and agricultural sectors are expected to be hardest hit.
In relation to alternative markets and in anticipation of whatever can happen today or tomorrow, we will be unveiling an export support office throughout the country. So the ability to say exporters currently who are trading in these sets of products that could be affected over the next 24 hours. How can you find alternative markets, which are the countries that we have agreements with, but also what support programs would be able to give. But that office is not just for those who essentially are looking for alternative markets. It becomes an office available to all South African entrepreneurs that are looking to export their products into different markets.
Well, let's talk more on this now, and the Democratic Alliance saying the country's hopes now rest with Minister Pak Stau to find a last-minute deal with the United States. Let's speak to that political party's international relations spokesperson, Ryan Smith, who talks to us tonight. Ryan, good evening to you. Thank you for your time. I just want to start off with something mentioned in your statement released yesterday, and it is that you say, as the DA, you welcome the decision not to retaliate against the 30% tariff threat. Was there ever intimation of that from government at some stage?
Thanks, Tlali, for having me on the show this evening. No, I think the statement that you're referring to is actually from our trade and industry spokesperson, Toby Chance, but I obviously am aware of what was said there.
Yeah.
I don't think, we're not sure what was negotiated in terms of the trade agreement. It is under a non-disclosure agreement at the moment, but even still, the South African government, and certainly Pak Stau, has not been transparent enough with South African industry insofar as what this means going forward. We've got, I think, less than probably about 12 hours now before the tariffs are likely to kick in. Given the time difference, that will be about 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. And aside from the manufacturers and exporters back home in South Africa, there are goods that are on ships currently at sea, and we don't know what is going to happen to any of that at the moment because of the fact that Pak Stau has really left the country in the dark on this. So no, we don't have any room for retaliatory measures, certainly against the United States.
Yeah.
But we need to negotiate the best deal possible for South Africa as soon as we can.
You say, even though you are blaming Stau's department of not communicating with South Africans, there is almost a disclaimer there that NDA or not, that's non-disclosure agreements or not. How does the minister and his department get around those non-disclosure agreements?
Well, remember, the non-disclosure agreement comes towards the end of the process, and we've asked for an extension in South Africa on our ability to negotiate a deal with the United States as is. We've now reached the end of the extension, and we still do not have a deal. And so the NDA really has come into play towards the end here. The problem is that from a diplomatic perspective, DIRCO was supposed to assess the political shifts in the United States and should have been able to preempt what South Africa required going into the Trump presidency and the Trump administration, and knowing that there was an America First agenda that the Republican Party was going to implement. And we should have actually been on the front foot here and been more proactive and preemptive in trying to prepare South Africa for these potential tariffs. We've then gone into the negotiating period. We've asked for an extension. And through this entire period, there has been very little communication from Pak Stau as to what the intention would have been in terms of certain sectors in the industry, what the fallback would likely be, what sort of percentage they were looking at getting tariffs negotiated down to. So even outside of the non-disclosure agreement, there's a lot of information that government could have provided to South African exporters and industry that has been, just left really unanswered.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem here, is that this is not a small matter. It is the difference between industry being able to continue as normal and actually looking at laying off workers and increasing the unemployment pew in South Africa because of negligence on the part of Parks Tau.
Interesting comment that you've just made, that it would have been, or it was, the responsibility of DIRCO, this is the Department of International Relations and Cooperation's failure to anticipate the new administration's political attitude and therefore forewarn of what would come. Am I hearing you correctly there? And if so, what should have DIRCO done differently?
Well, yes, absolutely. Trade and economic diplomacy is a multifaceted agenda. It has to begin with DIRCO, but it also includes departments like trade and industry, and certainly in the South African government's environment, you have to plug in industries such as agriculture, for example. We're one of the world's leading agricultural producers and exporters. So it must be a multifaceted approach in terms of the South African government. In terms of negotiating the tariffs, yes, that rests with Minister Parks Tau and the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. But in order to negotiate and negate and get the best possible deal, you have to involve other departments. And the crucial point here with DIRCO is that diplomacy really is the art of negotiating the world as it is in the best interests of your country. And if you look at the way that DIRCO has handled the situation in the United States, it really has been negligent. We haven't been able to get an adequate ambassador up and running in the United States to represent South Africa's interest in Washington. We've seen that there's been an issue with Mcebisi Jonas being sent as a special envoy. We still do not have a credible voice in Washington to represent the interests of South African industry. And this has created a problem, and this has been ongoing now for months. So it really is DIRCO and even to a certain extent the presidency's issue that they haven't made strides to really focus on this negotiation. And, the United States is not just another country. It is our second largest trading partner. And the effects of not negotiating a trade deal with urgency with the United States has absolutely catastrophic or potentially catastrophic consequences for South Africa.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting, the way that the DA is looking at this. Can I then try and transition from what you say are the failures of DIRCO and go to the ANC now? And I'm going to the ANC deliberately because the international relations space, or should we say South African foreign policy, rests with the presidency, right? That's the president's office. And that's what they have said, despite your efforts by the DA to try and get in terms of decision-making there. So the reason I'm going to the ANC, Ryan, is, again, going back to the statement of Toby Chance, the spokesperson on trade and industry, who then says the DA has repeatedly called for an ANC change of heart towards the United States in order to protect our economy and jobs. Do you want to expand on that? Do you understand exactly what Toby Chance was making reference to there? What is this change of heart?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think what it refers to is it's the fact that South Africa's foreign policy needs to take South Africa's interests into account. We need to be doing what's best for South Africa. And that is really the division between party and state. And the ANC, after 30 years of majority rule, has not been able to remove party political interests from what is the best interest of South Africa as a whole. And so that's what we say, that South Africa's foreign policy, certainly under the ANC, does require a change of heart, because it's not what the ANC wants, it is what is best for South Africa going forward. That is what the responsibility of the South African executive is, and certainly the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. And what we must realize is that in South Africa's government of national unity context, yes, foreign affairs rests in terms of the constitution with the president, but the president is no longer elected by one single party, but by a plurality of voices in parliament, including that of the DAs. And so it is his responsibility to respect the wishes of the parties that have given him power to execute as the president of the republic. And so in the coalition space, yes, this power is vested with the president. The ANC has certainly kept foreign affairs under an ANC ministry. Both the deputies are ANC, including the parliamentary chairperson. But in the coalition landscape, you must take into account the other voices of the coalition. And the statement of intent makes that very clear. It says that we must agree on a certain minimum basic program of priorities that has been set out. The one that is right at the top there is rapid and inclusive economic growth. Now, if we are taking foreign policy decisions based on what the ANC wants and not on what is in the best interest of South Africa, and if these decisions are leading to economic disaster and turmoil, it really is not serving any South African going forward, and is certainly not representative of the voices in the coalition that govern South Africa at a national level.
Ryan, South Africans listening to you and me tonight may be mistaken to think that South Africa has not been taking this matter seriously in terms of placing an offer on the table. One does exist. Pakstau did table this. Is it not true that perhaps we could be looking internally in South Africa and saying, we've done this, we've done that, that is wrong, and failing to recognize that it is the United States, the new administration, that has displayed intransigence here? It would seem that no matter what South Africa does, America is simply not satisfied. Have you taken that into cognizance?
Yes, we obviously have to take that into account. But, you know, the thing again with diplomacy and international trade is that we can't sit and lament the decision of voters in another country and sit and wring our hands over our inability to get what we want from a particular country in black and white, or get 100% of what we want as a particular country. That's where diplomacy comes into play. You have to get what you want being as nice as possible and being as cooperative as possible with your international trade partners.
Can I interrupt you for a moment?
It's a test, I think, of diplomacy. Yes.
I apologize. You would have heard at the Kgalemo Motlanthe Winter Seminar intimations that no matter what it is that we can do as a country, but the last thing we should ever do is to dice or play games with our sovereignty. And it would seem that's the space that the new administration in the US wants to play in. Should we allow for that?
No, we must respect the sovereignty of all states, absolutely. And we must ensure that South Africa isn't, pushed into a corner. I mean, on the one hand, you have to balance our sovereignty and make sure that South Africa can act in its own interest. But on the other hand, you must take into account the fact that South Africa's foreign policy decisions come with real life consequences. So if you are going to position South Africa in a particular way, you must understand that that might potentially come with flack from your trading partners and from countries with far larger economies than ours, and as a result that have a far greater say on the international stage than we do. We must always bear in mind that yes, South Africa is a sovereign state and we have every right to take the decisions that we determine are correct. But again, as I said earlier, those need to be in South Africa's interests, not in the interest of party political concerns that seem to stem from the ANC. At the same time, you need to leverage as best you can the best possible deal on the international stage, given the circumstances of your particular country, respecting your own sovereignty, but obviously being pragmatic about the international system in which you wade. And that really is where the diplomacy comes into play here. And we need to navigate the space as best we can. It's a real test for South African diplomacy, absolutely. But at the moment, it doesn't seem as if the ANC is really delivering here.
Here's how I would like for us to end this conversation, Ryan. A little earlier, I had a conversation with Agri-SA CEO, Johan Kotze. And I'd like for you to just take a listen to his word of advice for the country? And we'll continue shortly thereafter.
We're not hopeless. We have a fantastic produce and products, and we are cost effective. We can penetrate new markets. We are still lucrative in what we do in South Africa, and we just need to keep our heads down, work as hard as we can, see what we can do. And I think the most important thing, we should not start criticizing each other in South Africa and start fighting with each other regarding small things. We now need to stand together as a nation and stand up and say, there's a way. There's a way, and South Africa always found a way out of a difficult situation. And this one is no different. We're going to find this way. There's a lot of hope. There's a lot of faith amongst our farmers. It's difficult. We look into it and we say to ourselves, over this mountain, we're going to come.
And there is the crucial advice, Ryan, from Johan, and it is that we need to stop the blame game. If anything, this is the moment where South Africa once again demonstrates that it can pull together. Do you think you, as political parties represented in Parliament, are capable of doing that in the interests of South Africans?
Yes, well, look, I certainly think that political parties that are represented in national cabinets can pull together and make sure that we get the best deal for South Africa. That is their role as the executive. We as members of Parliament are required to hold the executive to account. So, you know, we are not critiquing for the sake of critiquing. We are critiquing because we have the best interests of the country at heart. And I think that, you know, AfriFour or Agri-SA really is a demonstration of the resilience of South African industry in the face of a government that has often failed them. And I think it's really important, certainly for the agricultural sector, to start exploring alternative markets. And if you look at Minister John Steenhuisen in the agricultural portfolio, he has done exactly that. So the kind of preparation that we expect from ministers is certainly what Minister Steenhuisen has done by setting up trade and new export markets, such as those in Thailand, Indonesia, and Japan, working closely with China as well, for example, to try and offset what we could potentially expect from US tariffs being implemented tomorrow. So no, we as MPs, we ask questions because that's our job. We have to keep Minister Tau and Minister Lamola accountable for their actions and inactions. Yeah. But we do agree that certainly in the cabinet and at cabinet level, we need to work together in the best interest of all South Africans.
Ryan Smith, thank you very much for your time. Democratic Alliance's International Relations spokesperson.